Hello and welcome back. I'm John Kelly here with Stephen Gordon to talk through the encounter commentary for issue number 17 of the 2CGazette, Skirmish in the Treetops. We're going to start, Steve, as usual, with a quick description of the encounter. So if you can just walk us through high level, what's it about, what's it do, and why is it interesting?
Yeah, so it's an encounter that seems really straightforward at first glance, especially to the players, which is kind of one of the goals here. It's got sort of a two-level setup where it takes place in a forest, and there's kind of a ground floor, which is pretty featureless generally, and then there are these branches that are kind of crisscrossing above the floor and have a lot of gaps between them that, you know, characters will be jumping over during the encounter, most likely. Characters that can fly or climb really well will do well here. And that kind of led into the design of the enemies here, where the players are going up against this group of elven warriors who are kind of part of this like little warrior cult of elves, and they just love to fight. And they they all use bows. They have special abilities that let them basically leap pretty far, like up to 30 feet from branch to branch, firing their bows in midair as they go, avoiding opportunity attacks, avoiding being pinned down. And they're accompanied by these fey jaguars, who are these fast, strong beasts that can grab people with their teeth and throw them off the branches, knocking them to the ground, basically further keeping the party from being in the positions they want to be in, or being able to engage the enemies they want to engage. Basically, why I think it's interesting is it's very simple at first glance, and is sort of designed to basically lure the party in and have them kind of think like, oh, this is just going to be an ordinary fight, we can just do whatever. And then they find that these enemies are using some pretty simple tactics that really play off of the terrain they're in to make them like really difficult to deal with. But still, if the party is clever, they can definitely lock them down.
Yeah, and there's definitely good counterplay options for the party to be able to work well here. Like you list in the document use of certain spells like Hold Person or Fairy Fire, the type of stuff that will really lock down opponents basically by themselves, have a lot of value here. I really liked, once I had a chance to kind of look at the map and read through the encounter and similar, I liked the idea of, the first thing that kind of jumped into my head was Disney's Tarzan, where he's like almost surfing through the trees, just jumping between them, and there's these massive branches, and there's creatures and animals, and then you sort of compare that to people who are not used to that environment, and they have a much harder time getting through it. So the idea that the encounter is sort of terrain first and then creatures, always an interesting kind of design concept. Which one do you pick going from one to the other? So I do like that. Let's talk a little bit about kind of the challenges that terrain, specifically in this case, using this as an example, but can create in an encounter. Because I think that sort of what you were saying, like this terrain doesn't appear particularly dangerous at the beginning, but then becomes so once the players realize the synergy. Very interesting.
Yeah, I think that terrain is really important in designing encounters. Like one of the things that I always try to do in encounter design is give the players a reason to move during the fight. And in this encounter, it's done in like 3 different ways. I really wanted to push that really hard here. So there's the 2 levels of the map, which by itself encourages people to move between them because enemies will be on the upper or lower levels. The elven enemies are super mobile. They're fast. They can jump around. And then the jaguar enemies move the players, so they have push effects where they can throw the players around. And between the 2 of those, it's going to force the players to really scramble around. And I think that oftentimes, because it's a fantasy game, the instinct for terrain is to be like, what if there's like a time warp field here that slows everyone, or a booster pad that lets people run really fast for one turn.
Yeah. Geysers of plasma or whatever. It has to be over the top almost in all circumstances.
Yeah. I think the previous encounter for this month is a great example where the main terrain feature is a Balor chained in the middle of a demonic foundry lashing out with its whip. Right. Obviously a very high fantasy terrain feature.
Yeah.
And then this encounter is kind of the polar opposite of that.
Yeah, and the sort of interesting thing in my mind is that this encounter's terrain elements are similarly dangerous, if not more essential to the encounter's design. What I like is sort of the complexity that is added here, because any maroon with a spear can walk around a fire jet that shoots out every couple of turns, but when you're trying to the way that it incorporates into the encounter here, I think is very subtle, and the difficulty that it adds a lot of subtlety to it, which is good. In the sort of discussion about this, we kind of talked about the very real possibility of the players being able to address the situation from a less combative standpoint. We had, as you were mentioning before, the Demon's Foundry. Everybody's demons, so there's not a lot of option to have peaceful discourse. But what we've got here is, functionally, we have 3 elves who just like to fight a lot. So it's very possible that the party can approach it and resolve it somewhat diplomatically. But you do include some cool items there, and maybe just speak to those real quick.
Yeah, one of the sort of experiments with this encounter was trying to find some non-combat solutions, some diplomatic solutions that don't just end the encounter immediately.
Right.
As we talked about, these elves, they just love to fight. They're, as I described them before the call, they're Klingon elves. And, even if the players come to an agreement with them, whatever, the plot hook section, of course, talks about possible reasons for the players to go into this situation. Mm-hmm. But if they come to an agreement with the elves are still going to want to fight them. They'll just agree to do it not lethally.
Sure. Sure.
And then, as you were mentioning in our talk before this call as well, even if the players charm the elves and become best friends with them, the elves are still going to want to fight because they fight their best friends. That's what these elves do. So it doesn't end the encounter immediately if somebody rolls well on persuasion. It turns it into a little bit more of a give and take, because the elves, they just want to fight. So it's about, what can the players offer them? We'll fight you, sure, and then we can pass. Or we have this bad guy. Why don't you come with us and we'll fight them together?
Yeah.
They just want to fight something.
Yeah. If the players can figure that out, they might have the ability to sort of strike a deal. I like the idea of this kind of combat starting out, and there's as usual sort of descriptions of the personalities and the approaches that these various elves will take during the course of the encounter. And I think that gives a lot of options for the DM to say, hey, let's show these personalities during combat. And maybe because the elves are so mobile, it's not going to be so heated or so kind of immediate, which happens a lot in encounters. And there might be a possibility for the encounter to start and then kind of shift over into a diplomatic kind of discussion about, hey, we're just doing this for fun. This is what we do.
Right.
Whoa, you killed him? We're just shooting you guys non-lethally, slow down there. So that type of thing. I really do enjoy the kind of diplomatic element here, and think that's going to be a very interesting component to this encounter. That's pretty much it. Any sort of closing items associated with Skirmish in the Treetops?
Yeah, not especially. I think it's a bit of an experiment in simplicity in encounter design.
Right.
We kind of talked about that in the orc invasion encounter of streamlining stuff. Mm-hmm. I wanted this encounter to be super easy for a DM to read, understand, prep, and run, and still be a really sort of deep tactical challenge for the party.
Yeah, very solid. There's other stuff in there, which you and I haven't really talked about in the commentary here, which I think is cool. There's an item that the players can get a hold of, and more discussions about kind of the synergy between the Fey Jaguars and the Elves. Viewers, I encourage you to read through the document yourself, see what you like about it, and then definitely let us know if you want any adjustments made, what you like, what you dislike, all that good stuff. And beyond that, I guess we'll plan to see you next month with whatever Steve's got in mind then. As always, thanks for the support. You can check us out on Patreon.